I invested 250,000 into a space junk tracker. Even for me, this was a bit of a crazy investment. But hear me out. I think cleaning space up will make me and my investors a lot of money. You see, there's a reason why Elon and Jeff are obsessed about space, and it's not because they're secretly aliens. It's because there are nearly 10,000 satellites circling our planet, and that is going to 10x in the next decade. These satellites quietly power militaries, TVs, banks, and even agriculture. Put simply, if you control space, you control the planet. Hence, Kim Jong-un's obsession with rocket technology. But look, there's a massive problem. Our orbit is now full of space junk and debris, and it's destroying all of the satellites up there. And if we don't fix this fast, it has the potential to start a chain reaction that basically knocks out a ton of our satellites and makes the Earth's orbit completely unusable. Think of it as an almighty version of the Wi-Fi is down. The solution is pretty obvious, like every mother knows. Clean up the space junk in your bedroom. But how do you even go about doing that? Hi folks, for those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Ibrahim. I'm an investor at Cur8 Capital. We invest in weird and wonderful things, also some sensible things, and then we make videos about it to tell you about what's happening out there. Imagine you're driving down the M1 motorway in England, our main highway. Only instead of an open road, what you see in front of you is just the wreckage of every car that's ever broken down ever on that road. Left where it crashed, on the side, in the middle, on the left-hand side. You not only have to dodge them, but also every broken car part, every piece of litter that was left behind from the travelers who didn't fare very well. Maybe, I don't know, some body parts. You have to navigate all of that. This is exactly the crisis we face with space junk. Orbital highways are quite literally littered with this stuff. Dead satellites, rocket parts, lost tools, flecks of paint, Mr. Beast's Feastables, and millions of other unknown objects. Okay, I made the Feastables bit up. It might be true. The problem is so extreme that expert bodies like the European Space Agency say orbits could become unusable, ending space exploration forever, even though we've just started on that process. But let's back up for a second. How did we even get ourselves into this crazy space garbage crisis in the first place? Well, since the first satellite launched in 1957, the number of objects in orbit has increased exponentially, especially in recent years, with the advent of smaller, cheaper satellites and reusable rocket technology from SpaceX. So, can we clean up this space junk? Well, here's where it gets interesting. Space junk is not just space junk, it's three different types of space junk. The groups of bigger junk on the right have existing solutions for removal that are being developed from companies like Astroscale, which help deorbit objects, and ClearSpace, which has a claw that literally grabs the junk as it's in orbit. And it's not as big a problem either, these big pieces of junk, because all of these big items are tracked. So evasive maneuvers can be performed by the ISS and astronauts to avoid collisions. But it's the groups of smaller junk on the left that are the real issue, as they're too small to be tracked, but large enough to cause damage. Historically, it's been impossible to track these pieces of debris due to their size, and as a result, they have caused billions worth of damage to satellites. The International Space Station and other expensive equipment have all suffered. This space junk group in the middle of 1 to 10 centimeters has around 1 million pieces in orbit right now, which is pretty bad. But the sub 1 centimeter space junk has, wait for it, 130 million objects in orbit, which is a huge cause for concern. Every time a tiny fragment like a bolt or a fleck of paint smaller than a coin, faster than a bullet, hits a satellite, it's powerful enough to cause serious damage. Let's say you and I do not want to be getting in front of that fleck of paint. There are solutions that have been provided, by the way, for this sub 1 centimeter space junk issue. Things like throwing clouds of tungsten dust or huge space sweepers to deorbit these smaller particles, they've not been deemed to be economically viable by NASA, as the expense is huge and there's no real guarantee of success even after doing it. The crux of the issue is that these small particles are not tracked. So cleaning solutions would be largely like shooting arrows in the dark. Put simply, you can't clean this small space junk up without tracking it. So are we forever doomed to be stuck with these 130 million pieces of tiny space junk? Well, not quite, as an incredible new tracking solution has entered into the market, attracting millions in funding from investors. And we were so excited about it that we've given them $250,000 of our money as well. Maybe this is the answer. This is Odin Space. In London, James and Dan are getting ready to launch this innovative, unexpected, and kind of weird tracking solution for helping clean up space in the future. We'll share that incredible solution later on in the video, but to help us fully understand it, we need to talk first a little bit about Orbital Highways. Dr. James New is the CEO of Odin Space and one of the world's leading space researchers.
So that's low Earth orbit. That's anything sort of easy to access. It's, we're talking several hundred kilometers altitude. I think technically it's probably about 400 to about 2,000. Again, you can fact check those numbers, but that's sort of your low Earth orbit. That's pretty much where all the commercial satellites are going.
The source of the space junk issue, aside from Elon Musk's excessive rocket launches, is that we actually have three types of orbital highways around the Earth. Not just one big expanse of space as most of us think. The highway with objects at the highest orbital altitudes, which is 36,000 kilometers above the Earth, are in what is called a geostationary orbit. Objects here can survive essentially indefinitely. This is the highway that is not really an issue, as it's relatively clear with only very expensive telecoms, weather, and military satellites in orbit. Sounds a bit like the M3 in the UK. Anyway, similarly, middle Earth orbit is also not really an issue, not because it just has hobbits on it, but because it doesn't have very much traffic of space objects. But it's the low Earth orbit, that's the problem child, the enfant terrible, the George Best of orbits. It ranges from 160 to 2,000 kilometers above the Earth's surface. This is the most crowded orbital highway, home to many scientific satellites, space, internet constellations, the Hubble Space Telescope, and most importantly, where astronauts spend most of their time when they're up there.
The best way of thinking about space, rather than LEO, MEO, GEO, is more different orbital highways. Because of course there's altitude, then there's also inclination, which is, you might be flying over the North and South Pole at 550 kilometers, but you also might be flying around the equator at the same altitude. So not only have you got satellites all flying around at the same height, they're also flying in different directions. So they're kind of crossing each other's paths. So it kind of is a bit of a nightmare. It's a bit of a spaghetti situation.
In the lower Earth orbit, also known as LEO, space junk could take from a few months to a few years to come back to Earth. For an object to stay in low Earth orbit for many years, like the ISS, it must regularly boost itself up to counteract against this atmospheric drag. But the higher an object is in orbit, the weaker gravity's grip is, and the longer it will stay in space. So if the rate we launch rockets and satellites into lower Earth orbit keeps outpacing the rate of decay of these parts back to Earth, then something scary called the Kessler syndrome, popularized by the American astrophysicist Don Kessler, comes into play. You see, the more crowded space gets, it's more likely that objects will crash into each other, creating a scary runway reaction of collisions. This means that it will become forever impossible to launch any more rockets into space because you've got these mad collisions happening constantly up there. And James argues that this could be happening already. Research actually from a leading researcher called Dr. J.C. Liu found that if we do nothing, we could reach this point of no return within 100 years. Put simply, not cleaning the lower Earth orbit could spell the end of space exploration forever. No more sci-fi movies, folks. It's really bad. It's the orbital highway that most urgently needs cleaning and is the focus for Odin Space, our champions of sci-fi movies. But look, there's actually a real-world impact of this problem as well. You know, people say, why should we bother up cleaning this space in the first place? Who cares if we don't make it to Mars? Who cares if we don't have any Star Trek movies? Well, the funny thing is, the benefits of space to humans has been both direct and indirect. Directly, we rely massively on these satellites for GPS when you're on Google Maps or Waze if you're a maniac. It's not just GPS, it's online shopping, instant bank transfers, live broadcasts, weather forecasts. Things we all consume daily rely on satellites being operational. To put it into context, circa 20% of the entire UK GDP is dependent on satellite services. And I know the UK economy isn't doing that well, but please, we do need the satellites, otherwise we're going to be in really big trouble. But it's not even just direct benefits from satellites. That memory foam mattress you sleep on, the prosthetic limbs, the infrared thermometers, water purification systems are all things that were originally developed for space. It's kind of like how Formula One engineering teams push the limits of innovation in driving, which we then all ultimately enjoy the benefits of in our own cars, admittedly at 70 miles an hour rather than 250 miles an hour, but anyway. So how do we fix this? Well, Odin Space.
Our goal from a hardware position is that these sensors of ours become an absolute go-to component of every satellite that gets launched. So you can do some research, but something similar to a star tracker, which everyone uses for navigation, we see that this effectively becomes a black box for satellites.
What exactly is their solution then? Well, it's still pretty early days, but their solution is basically part physics experiment, part detective story. Their big idea, which is due to hit the mass market very soon, involves a sensor small enough to fit in the palm of your hand, yet powerful enough to be stuck on a satellite and detect debris that no one has ever been able to track before, and help eventually clean it up. And a key part of their plan is to eventually use thousands, maybe even millions of tiny sensors to help insure satellites and ultimately build a live 4D map of space junk.
So I think for us, the ultimate goal is that we have the complete knowledge on everything that's happening in space so that people can navigate it safely.
These tiny USB-sized sensors from Odin Space could be the answer to clean up this mess once and for all.
Yeah, think of it as some sort of mix between Google Maps, the Met Office, and Bloomberg. It's kind of those three for kind of mixed into what we'd like to call the intelligence layer for space.
Remember how early in the video we covered how NASA said it's not economically viable to go after this tiny space junk? So how exactly do these tiny sensors from Odin Space actually make this space junk cleaning up operation financially viable when it wasn't before? Well, right now only 5% of satellites in space are insured, as nobody really knows how many tiny fragments are up there, where they are, or how fast they're moving. It's like saying, does anyone want to insure Neo from the Matrix when he's just about to be shot by Mr. Smith? Of course, everyone turns around and says, no, absolutely not. He's going to get marmalized, because it's impossible for insurance to price this risk for companies, as it's an unknown unknown, and you can't know how these satellites got damaged. You can't insure those satellites. Odin Space changes that. Just like Neo, when he starts to see the Matrix and everything slows down and he can sense it all and he can control it, Odin Space, their sensors are like a black box in a new driver's car that can reduce insurance premiums because they turn this invisible into data down to the fragments that are smaller than a grain of rice. And once that data exists, it does something powerful. It unlocks the insurance market, because now insurance companies can finally quantify the risk of collision in space and measure it. Reinsurers, the ones who back the entire system, they start returning to the sector, and that unlocks lots more insurance. And satellite operators, they now start getting rewarded for flying safer orbits, tracking debris, and investing in protection. That's where it starts to snowball, because the same data that helps insurers price risk also tells us where the danger is. Odin's long-term goal is actually real-time debris weather mapping, a constantly updated model of where these micro debris are thickest. That map becomes the targeting system for future cleanup missions. So instead of guessing, services like ClearSpace or Astroscale will know exactly which orbital lanes to sweep and when. And suddenly, there's an economic reason to clean up. If you can prove that removing debris from a certain orbit lowers everyone's premiums, insurers and operators will pay for that cleanup. Governments and agencies can subsidize it, just like carbon credits reward cutting emissions. So Odin doesn't just help track space junk, it makes cleaning it up. Makes sense financially because it achieves almost 100% insurance coverage over time. And just like what happened to the shipping industry 300 years ago, ocean trade was as risky as space travel is today. Ships sank, storms hit, Moby Dick, pirates, and almost every voyage was a gamble few could afford. And then insurance arrived. It turned sea travel from a reckless adventure, treasure island type stuff into a functioning global industry. Odin Space is doing for orbit what insurance once did for the oceans. Their sensors make invisible debris measurable, letting insurers finally price the risk. What we've learned is that once again, human ingenuity that took us to space has unforeseen consequences that can and ultimately will harm us. But what we have also learned is that it is this very ingenuity that can still allow space to remain a beneficial place for human beings. But that time is running out, and the future is going to be won by those scientists, entrepreneurs, and engineers who are brave enough to step up with solutions to clean up this junk once and for all. By the way, if you're an investor and want to invest in mad stuff like Odin Space alongside me, or you're a company that does sensible things but also crazy things like Odin Space, let me know. Get in touch on the link in the description below and I'll have a chat with you. If you have enjoyed this video, make sure that you show that digitally by liking the video and subscribing for more content like this. Otherwise, you will never see me again. It also massively helps grow our channel. Until next time, au revoir.